fucking hate my dad.
I thought you looked up to that motherfucker. Thought y'all was tight.
He's a fucking liar. Can't even trust him no more.
You trust me, little man.
When it comes to the journey of Kanan Stark, we'll remember the gangster, the master manipulator, the great chess player, but also eventually going out in a blaze of bullets after failing to get his revenge on Ghost. Although some would argue Kanan did eventually get his revenge just through Tariq St. Patrick. But as we're now past the halfway stage of Season 2 in Raising Kanan, we're beginning to understand there is definitely a long journey ahead for a young Kanan, but also why the older Kanan took Tariq under his wing and cared for him in the manner he did. There are a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences. So in this video, we're going to run through why Tariq was a son Kanan always wanted, along with the similarities and key differences, but balancing everything with different perspectives. Now, as we get deeper into Season 2 of Power Book 3, we're finally starting to see a glimpse of the Kanan we saw in Power. But if we take it back, Kanan's been someone who's been irresponsible, quick on the trigger, and someone who's lost loved ones because of his actions, very similar to Tariq St. Patrick across both Power and Power Book 2 Ghost. So far, Kanan has lost D-Wiz, dropped countless of bodies on the street, causing chaos and mistakes, very similar to Tariq, who suffered the same fate. So both characters have gone through some trauma and suffered sleepless nights remembering the people they've killed, and in Kanan's young life, shooting Detective Howard. And these were the words of 50 Cent on a young Kanan. When we meet Kanan, he's young and impressionable, and he's just trying to figure his way out through life with a bunch of people around him that influence him, and that's why it's called Raising Kanan. You meet him as this child, basically a kid who knows nothing about anything, and throughout the show, you get to go on this journey with him and see how he becomes so desensitized, how exactly he turns into the monster we know on Power. That really is the biggest thing. It's just a journey of watching him lose his innocence. So when it comes to watching Kanan losing his innocence phase, which is where we currently are in the timeline, it really does make us understand even more why he cared about Tariq. But let's rewind it back for a moment and look at Kanan and Tariq's relationship in Power. Now, when Kanan met Tariq, he was somewhat in his innocence phase, but slowly turning. And no doubt, the one person who arguably had the biggest influence in Tariq's life was Kanan Stark, although Tariq first met him as Slim. Now, we all know that Tariq and Kanan grew very close, especially because Kanan saw a lot of his young self in Tariq. He was also the only person who was honest with him, and so we saw Kanan taking Tariq through the neighborhood where he used to run the streets with Ghost and Tommy. He introduced him to his people as well as teaching him how to hustle, but they also bonded over the fact they shared the same hatred for Ghost, and Tariq sat in the same position where Ghost actually killed Breeze. Now, even though Kanan and Duke had different ideas of what to do with Tariq, this close bond that they were building was because Tariq turned out to be the son Kanan always wanted.
You like the son I never had or some shit.
And on the flip side, Tariq was also the only person who cared about Kanan.
You know, I was the only person that really cared for Kanan. I just took a loss so you guys could win.
But in this game, when you start caring and taking your eye off the game, that's when you run the risk of either ending up dead or in jail. For example, we had Duke telling Kanan that he's got this side where he cares and to never to lose it. But ironically, this was his ultimate downfall when it came to Tariq St. Patrick. He cared about Tariq and he dropped his guard, which is what ultimately cost him his life. Because when Kanan made a point of how he was never going to go back inside, it was always going to end in one way for Kanan Stark: death. Now, before we get into more similarities between Tariq and Kanan, we do need to mention there are also a lot of differences. Something we learned in Power was how Kanan grew up in the streets, just like we're now seeing in Power Book 3, whereas Tariq grew up with a privileged background. But we do have to say, even though Kanan did grow up in the streets, he did have a chance to go to Stuyvesant, but he chose to be in the game, very similar to Tariq, but ironically, something which he now regrets, because in Season 2 of Ghost, he had to navigate his life with a court case, Stansfield, looking after Yaz, and dealing with the Tejadas. So is it such a surprise he now wants an exit from the game? Definitely not, because he's slowly coming to the realization Ghost was right.
I don't want you to make the same mistake, son.
okay? I'm trying to protect you, man. I'm trying to protect you from a life of misery, son.
Ghost also had an opportunity, the same as Tariq, although one can argue for Kanan, even though he had an opportunity to go to Stuyvesant and choose a path which could have led him away from the game. He was always destined to be the Kanan we saw in Power, and in the words of Detective Howard, his name is Kanan Stark, which comes from Rondell Defcon Stark, whose face belongs on the Mount Rushmore of Kingpins, right next to Nicky Barnes and Frank Lucas. And also, as Unique once said, Kanan is Defcon's boy. He's been in this shit before he was even in this shit. We can also add the fact Rock has always wanted to keep him close by and basically sees him as an extension of herself, and at times using Kanan to further her ambition. So Kanan was always destined to be in the game. But another major difference between Kanan and Tariq is how tough Kanan is. We went through how he beat the brakes off Freddy, and it comes back around to how Rock taught him from an early age, deal with them or deal with her. He also wanted to make sure his name commands respect in the streets, and he wasn't just a brown bag boy. But this is something we haven't seen from Tariq yet. Despite how smart he is, we're yet to see him throw his hands and beat the brakes off someone just like Kanan did. Although again, some would argue Tariq is the money man, the man who's behind the plans, and he doesn't exactly need to get into physical altercations because he's got people doing that for him. But in this game, where trouble follows Kanan and Tariq St. Patrick, sometimes your back will be against the wall, where you've got no choice but to use your fists. For example, when it came to Bars and Nuff. Now, when it comes to both parents, Tariq wanted Ghost to teach him the game, and at times, I really do wonder what would have happened in an alternate Power universe, where Ghost did teach Tariq the motherfucking game, but he told Tariq he'd rather kill him. So instead, we saw Tasha teaching Tariq the game, and in Raising Kanan, we've got Rock bringing Kanan into the mix, telling him how he's gonna be a leader. Two mothers who accepted their sons for who they were, and if they were gonna be in the game, then they were better off learning under them. But Tasha did soon realize the consequences of the game, because the St. Patricks were broken beyond repair. Something Ghost tried to tell her from day one, but we haven't exactly seen a huge consequence for the Thomas family just yet. But it definitely will happen, which is when Rock may change the way she thinks, but for now, she continues to be power hungry, which will eventually go down to Kanan. So as we come away from the differences, there's also a reason why Kanan and Tariq formed this father and son type of bond and relationship. Kanan saw a lot of himself in Tariq, and as the seasons went on in Power, where Tariq lost his innocence just like Kanan did, Michael Rainey Jr. said, "That's fun to hear that there is some of Tariq in young Kanan." And so another is how they've had to deal with pathological liars as parents, and so it's easy to see why they were so drawn to each other and why Kanan understood Tariq. Tariq learned how to lie from Ghost and Tasha, although at first they lied to protect him because they didn't want Tariq to go through the same things they did. They wanted to provide Tariq with an opportunity to excel and give him a platform and a foundation which they never had, something ironically Ghost turned down because he couldn't leave Tommy. But when we were introduced to Kanan in Power, he was someone who already knew how to lie, and no doubt he got this from Rock. And we are slowly witnessing Kanan turning into a great liar, which is why it's so hard for Rock to read him. Very similar to how Tasha failed to realize Tariq wasn't this young kid anymore, he was a killer.
The right way.
Reek, Tommy is a fucking killer.
So am I.
So it dawned on Tasha, Tariq wasn't a kid anymore, but where we talk about parents lying to their kids, all Tariq wanted was from Ghost and Tasha was to be honest with him, which is why he felt more of a connection to Kanan than he did Ghost. Kanan was the only character who was truly honest with him, which goes back round to how Tariq said he was the only one who cared about Kanan. So as we talk about how they really cared for each other, with Kanan being the only one who was honest with Tariq, and how he was a son Kanan always wanted, we can't forget about how Kanan killed Duke to save Tariq. And once Duke was gone, we saw Kanan and Tariq's relationship develop even further, especially in season 5, where Kanan was giving him life lessons, like the easiest way to sneak upon his enemies is to make them think that they've already won. So where Kanan was Ghost's mentor back in the day, Kanan was now teaching Tariq in the same way. So of course, when it came to Tariq killing Ghost, Kanan was always gonna show, because he understands at first hand what he had to do. He had to kill Ghost because he'd never see it coming from Tariq. Exactly why Rock sent Kanan to shoot Howard, because he would never see it coming from Kanan. But the key difference is, Kanan didn't know he was pulling the trigger on his father. He thought he was doing what he had to do to keep his family safe. And both Tariq and a young Kanan are now finding out more about their fathers after they shot them. Tariq is learning more about Ghost in Power Book 2 Ghost. And now so is Kanan in Power Book 3, in a different way of course, and it will definitely be intriguing to see how the story of Kanan and how it does end. But the ending is something which Tariq is already thinking of, because he knows at first hand what happens in the game. He's lost countless of loved ones that he cared about, like Raina, Lakeisha, Lauren, and also his best friend Kanan, which is why Tariq speaks about a third option out of the game, which doesn't end up with him dead or in jail. But will Tariq make it out of the game, avoiding the same fate as Kanan, Ghost, and everybody else in his nightmare, or will he eventually have to suffer the same consequence? Should we even feel sorry for Tariq, or should he actually get what's coming to him? When and if it eventually does. Power is a vicious cycle, and eventually I do think Tariq at some point needs to meet his end. But if there is one person who's clever enough to make it out of the game, I wouldn't bet against Tariq. And with that being said, that's a breakdown of some of the similarities as well as differences between a young Kanan and Tariq St. Patrick, but also why Kanan saw himself in Tariq, who no doubt helped him morph into the man he is now. But as Tariq starts to understand Ghost more and more, maybe we'll see Kanan's hallucination being replaced by Ghost when it is the end for Tariq. So drop all your thoughts down below on both Kanan and Tariq, and of course if you are new to the channel and you haven't done so already, then remember to smash the subscribe button if you want to see everything Power Book 3 and Power Universe related. But as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.